The muleteer's voice cut through the gray dawn like a blade through silk, and Saera Wolfstone found herself gripping her ledger hard enough to feel the leather binding press into her palms. "I will not take wet salt over that trail in this weather, Miss Wolfstone, and no amount of pressing from your father will change my mind." She had been the mine's tally keeper for 3 years, ever since her 21st summer, and in all that time she had never seen a teamster refuse a load outright. They grumbled, certainly. They haggled over rates. But they did not plant their boots on the loading dock planks and cross their arms like a man settling in for a siege. The man before her was new to the Valley Run, arrived only a month past when old Hennick took sick and sold his team. His name was Corwin Keller, and he stood perhaps an inch over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who worked with their hands and their backs. His hair was the color of oak bark, pulled back in a practical tie, and his eyes were a pale gray that reminded her of winter mornings. He was looking at her now with an expression that was not quite apologetic but entirely unyielding. "The loads are sealed," Saera said, keeping her voice level. Behind her, the mine entrance yawned dark and deep into the hillside, the first shift already hammering away at the salt face 100 yards into the mountain. "The canvas is double-wrapped. It has been raining for 3 days, Mr. Keller. If we waited for dry weather in spring, nothing would move until summer." "The canvas is fine," Corwin said. "The salt is not the problem. The problem is that the switchback 2 miles up the pass has been weeping water for those same 3 days. And the last time I came down it, yesterday evening, I could see the whole upper turn is starting to slump. You load those mules with 400 pounds of salt apiece and send them up a trail that is already cutting loose. You will lose the string, the salt, and possibly the animals. I will not do it." Sarah's father, Graudoc Wolfstone, would be furious. He was already in a foul temper this week, snapping at the shift bosses and spending long hours in the deep tunnels where the older workings ran. The spring orders were backed up, and every day of delay meant penalties with the merchants in the southern towns. She could go to him now, let him deal with this stubborn human, but the thought made something twist uncomfortably in her chest. Her father's solutions lately involved shouting and threats of finding new teamsters, and they could not afford to lose another hauler. She looked past Corwin to where his mule string stood in patient lines, 10 animals altogether, their breath steaming in the chill air. They were good mules, well kept and calm. A man who cared for his animals that well was not a coward or a shirker. "Show me," she said abruptly. Corwin blinked. "What? Show me the switchback. I want to see what you are talking about." For a moment he simply stared at her, and she saw something shift in his expression, a quick reassessment. "Now, right now. The first wagon is not due until mid-morning, and if you are right about the trail, I need to know before we lose time arguing." She tucked her ledger under her arm and started toward the stable where her own mount was kept, not waiting to see if he would follow. She heard his boots on the planks behind her, then his voice closer than she expected. "You keep a horse, a pony. Taller horses do not like the mine tunnels." She glanced back at him. "Can you ride, or do you need to bring one of your mules? I can ride." There was something that might have been amusement in his voice, but when she looked his face was carefully neutral. 20 minutes later they were climbing the pass trail, Saera on her sturdy gray pony and Corwin on a borrowed mare from the mine's small stable. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, but the sky was still low and heavy, and mist clung to the valley sides like wet wool. The trail rose steeply from the loading docks, cutting back and forth up the eastern wall of the valley in a series of sharp turns. They rode in silence for the first mile. Saera found herself watching the way Corwin sat his horse, easy and balanced despite the rocky footing. He had the look of a man who had spent time in a saddle, though his hands showed the calluses of someone who worked with rope and harness more than reins. "You are not from the mining valleys," she said finally. "No." He guided the mare around a wash of loose gravel. "I am from the southern plains near the border forts, long way from home. I go where the work is." His tone did not invite further questions, and Saera let the silence return. The switchback he had mentioned was just past the second mile, where the trail doubled back on itself in a tight hairpin. As they approached, Saera felt her stomach sink. Even from 20 yards away she could see what Corwin meant. Water was seeping from the uphill cut, turning the trail surface into a slick of mud and small stones. The outer edge, where the mules would place their hooves, looked soft and crumbling. She dismounted and walked to the edge carefully, crouching to examine the footing. When she pressed her boot against the outer berm, she felt it shift. Below, the slope dropped away into a tumble of rock and scrub pine, steep enough that anything going over would not stop for 100 feet. "How bad was it yesterday?" she asked. Corwin had dismounted as well and stood a few paces back, giving her space to look. "Worse. It has drained some overnight, but put weight on it now while it is still saturated and it will go." Saera stood slowly, brushing mud from her hands. She looked up the trail to where it continued climbing toward the pass, then back down toward the valley and the mine. Her father needed this shipment to move, but Corwin was right. Sending loaded mules over this trail today would be reckless at best and deadly at worst. "We will need to reroute," she said. "Take the lower valley road to the south junction and come up the Traders Pass. It adds 2 days, but it gets the salt through safely." Corwin met her eyes, and for the first time that morning she saw something like approval in his expression. "Your father will not like the delay." "My father does not have to like it, he has to accept it." She swung back into her saddle. "Come on, we need to get back before the wagons start loading." The ride down was faster than the climb, and by the time they reached the loading docks, the sun had burned through the mist enough to cast weak shadows on the ground. Sarah's father was standing near the scale house, talking with one of the shift bosses, and she felt her resolve harden as she dismounted and walked toward him. Growlduck Wolfstone was a big man, even for an orc, broad through the chest and shoulders with the kind of strength that came from a lifetime working underground. His skin was the deep green of pine needles, darker than Sarah's own lighter shade, and his tusks were prominent enough to show even when his mouth was closed. He looked up as she approached, his expression already impatient. "There you are. Keller says he will not take the string up. I told him we do not pay teamsters to refuse work." "The upper switchback is unstable," Saera said before her father could continue. "I rode up to see it myself. We are rerouting to the Traders Pass until the trail dries out." Her father's eyes narrowed. "That is 2 extra days." "It is better than losing 10 mules and 4 tons of salt. The trail has been wet before. Not like this." She kept her voice level, the same tone she used when reviewing tallies with him, factual and calm. "The outer edge is slumping. Corwin is right to refuse it." Growlduck's gaze shifted past her to where Corwin stood holding the horses, and something hardened in his face. "Since when do we let the help make decisions about the mine's business?" "Since the help is the one responsible for the animals and the cargo," Saera said. "And since I am the tally keeper and it is my job to make sure we do not lose money on stupid risks." For a long moment her father stared at her, and Saera stared back, refusing to look away. Finally, Growlduck made a rough noise in his throat and turned back to the shift boss. "Fine. Reroute to the Traders Pass. But I want those loads moving by noon, and I want the southern buyers told the delay is weather, not incompetence." "I will send the messages," Saera said. Her father waved a hand in dismissal and walked away toward the mine entrance, his boots heavy on the ground. Saera let out a breath she had not realized she was holding and turned to find Corwin watching her with an odd expression. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You were right," Saera said. "That is all." She took the pony's reins from him and led the animal back toward the stable, suddenly feeling the need to be moving, to be doing something with her hands. Corwin followed, leading the mare. "Your father runs a tight operation. My father runs a profitable operation." Saera glanced at him. "There is a difference. I am beginning to see that." She wanted to ask what he meant, but they had reached the stable and there were grooms waiting to take the horses. Saera handed over the pony and walked back toward the scale house, her ledger still tucked under her arm. Behind her, she heard Corwin start giving orders to his team about repacking the loads for the longer route, his voice calm and clear. She did not see him again for the rest of that day, but she found herself thinking about the way he had stood his ground on the dock that morning, and the way he had looked at the trail with the eye of someone who understood that safety and speed were not always the same thing. The spring wore on, and with it came the rhythm of the mine's work. Saera spent her days in the scale house and the tally shed, weighing loads and recording shipments, checking manifests against inventory and tracking the flow of salt from the deep tunnels to the loading docks. It was detailed work, the kind that required patience and a good memory, and she was good at it. Corwin's mule string made the run to the southern markets every 8 days, and after that first confrontation, Saera found that working with him was easier than it had been with old Hennick. Corwin kept meticulous records of his own, noting weights and weather and trail conditions in a small leather-bound book he carried in his coat pocket. When he delivered a load, he could tell her exactly how much each bundle had weighed at departure, and whether any had been damaged or compromised on the journey. They fell into a pattern. Corwin would arrive at dawn, his string moving quiet and orderly through the valley mist. Saera would meet him at the scales with her ledger, and they would go through the loading together, checking each bundle and marking it off against the order sheets. At first, their conversations were purely functional, a recitation of weights and destinations, but gradually they began to expand. "Rain again tonight," Corwin said one morning in late spring, squinting up at the sky as Saera marked off the last of his loads. "The Trader's Pass is going to be mud from top to bottom." "Can you make it through?" Saera asked. "Probably, but it will be slow." He patted the neck of the lead mule, a big gray animal with clever eyes. "We might need to overnight at the halfway shelter instead of pushing through." Saera did the calculation in her head. "That puts you in town a day late. Better late than stuck." Corwin glanced at her. "Unless your father has other ideas." "My father is not here. I am." She closed her ledger. "Use your judgment. If you think the animals need rest, rest them." Something shifted in Corwin's expression, a softening around his eyes. "You trust me." "I trust you to know your job," Saera said, but even as she said it she realized it was more than that. In the weeks since that first morning, she had come to rely on Corwin's steady competence, his refusal to cut corners or push his animals past their limits. It was a relief, after years of dealing with teamsters who saw the mules as nothing more than cargo haulers, to work with someone who actually cared. "I appreciate that," Corwin said. He hesitated, then added, "Not everyone does." "Not everyone knows what they are looking at," Saera said. She meant it as a simple statement of fact, but she saw Corwin's mouth twitch into something that was almost a smile. "No," he agreed. "I suppose they do not." He left an hour later, the mule string winding up the valley road in a long, patient line. Saera watched them go, then turned back to the scale house where the next wagon was already waiting. It was a month later, on a clear summer morning, that everything began to change. Saera was in the deep tunnels, doing a routine inspection of the inventory stores, when she heard the crack. It was not loud, just a sharp pop like green wood snapping in a fire, but it came from above her head and it made her freeze in place, her lantern casting jumping shadows on the salt-crusted walls. She looked up. The ceiling of the tunnel was supported by heavy timber props, thick beams set every 10 feet to hold back the weight of the mountain. The props in this section were old, she knew, some of them dating back to when her grandfather had first opened this seam, but they had always held. Now, looking up at them in the lantern light, she saw something that made her breath catch. The prop directly above her head had a crack running down its length, a dark split in the wood that looked fresh and raw. As she watched, a small shower of rock dust sifted down from the ceiling, and she heard another faint pop. Saera backed away carefully, keeping her eyes on the ceiling. When she was clear of the immediate area, she turned and walked quickly back toward the main tunnel, her mind already racing. One cracked prop might be nothing, just old wood settling. But if it was part of a larger problem, if the timbering in this section was failing, they needed to know before someone got hurt. She found her father in the upper workings, overseeing the installation of a new hand pump for drainage. He looked up as she approached, his expression already impatient. "What is wrong?" "I need to do a full inspection of the old seam timbering," Saera said without preamble. "I just saw a cracked prop in Tunnel 7, and I want to check the rest before we run any more ore carts through that section." Growldock frowned. "The props in Tunnel 7 have been there for 20 years. "Which is exactly why they need inspection," Saera said. "Wood does not last forever, especially not down here in the damp." Her father was quiet for a moment, and Saera saw something flicker across his face, there and gone too quickly to read. "Do your inspection," he said finally. "But do it quietly. I do not want the crews spooked over nothing." "If it is nothing, there will be nothing to spook them over," Saera said. "But if it is something, they need to know." Growldock's jaw tightened. "Just do the inspection, Saera, and do not make it into more than it is." Saera wanted to argue, but she knew her father's moods well enough to recognize when pushing would only make things worse. She nodded and left him there, climbing back up toward daylight with her lantern in one hand and a growing knot of worry in her chest. She spent the next 3 days in the tunnels, checking every prop and beam in the old workings. What she found made the knot in her chest pull tighter. Nearly a third of the timbering was compromised. The wood rotted through in places or cracked from the weight above. Some of it was subtle, hairline splits that would be easy to miss in the dim light. Some of it was obvious, props that were visibly bowing under the load or beams that gave off hollow sounds when tapped. She documented everything in her ledger, sketching rough maps of the tunnels and marking each questionable timber with a number and a note. By the time she was finished, she had filled 6 pages with careful notations. When she brought the ledger to her father, he looked at it for a long moment without speaking. Then he closed the book and handed it back to her. "We will replace the worst of it," he said. "After the summer contracts are filled." Saera stared at him. "Father, some of these props could fail any time. We need to replace them now." "We need to fill our contracts," Growldock said. His voice was hard. "Do you know what it costs to shut down a seam for redembering? We would lose a month of production, maybe more. And if the southern buyers think we cannot meet our obligations, they will go to the Ironbrow mine instead, and we will lose those contracts permanently. If a tunnel collapses, we will lose more than contracts," Saera said. "We could lose lives. The tunnels have held for 20 years. They will hold for another 3 months." Growldock's tone left no room for argument. "We will do the work in autumn after the rush. Until then, we work carefully and we keep production up." Saera opened her mouth to protest, but her father had already turned away, dismissing her. She stood there with her ledger in her hands, feeling a cold anger settle in her stomach. He was wrong. She knew he was wrong. But he was also the owner of the mine, and what he said was law here in the valley. She walked out of the office and stood on the loading dock, looking out at the familiar landscape of the mine yard. The scale house, the storage sheds, the stable and the bunk houses where the workers slept. Everything running smooth and orderly, everything turning profit, and underneath it all, in the dark tunnels beneath the mountain, timber props were cracking under weight they were never meant to hold forever. You look like someone just kicked your favorite dog. Saera turned to find Corwin standing at the edge of the dock, his mule's string already loaded and ready for departure. She had not even heard him arrive. "Just mine business," she said, trying to force her expression into something neutral. Corwin looked at her for a moment, then climbed up onto the dock and stood beside her. "Do you want to talk about it?" "There is nothing to talk about." Saera realized she was still gripping her ledger hard enough to dent the leather and made herself relax her hands. "My father made a decision. I do not agree with it, but it is his mine." "But you are the tally keeper," Corwin said. "Do your tallies not matter?" Saera laughed, a short bitter sound. "My tallies matter when they show profit. When they show problems, they are suddenly just suggestions." Corwin was quiet for a moment. "What kind of problems?" Saera looked at him, weighing whether to say anything. He was a teamster, an outsider, not someone who had any stake in the mine's operation. But he was also someone who had stood his ground about the switchback trail, someone who understood that safety was not negotiable. "The timbering in the old workings is failing," she said quietly. "I found cracks and rot all through Tunnel 7 and the connecting seams. It needs to be replaced before something gives way." "And your father said no," he said after the summer contracts are filled. Saera looked back out at the valley. 3 months from now, maybe 4. Corwin's face went still in a way that reminded Saera of the morning on the trail, when he had looked at the slumping switchback and made his decision. "That is a long time to work under bad timber." "That is what I said." "Will he listen if you push?" "No." Saera felt the weight of that single word settle over her. "He is convinced the mine can hold until autumn, and maybe he is right, maybe it will." "And maybe it will not," Corwin said. Saera looked at him, saw the concern in his pale gray eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. It was the first time anyone had simply agreed with her, had not tried to minimize the risk or tell her she was worrying over nothing. "Maybe it will not," she agreed quietly. Corwin hesitated, and Saera saw him wrestling with something, his jaw tight. Finally he said, "I have worked in mines before, down in the southern territories, silver mostly. If you want someone to look at your timbering, give you a second opinion, I would be willing." "You would do that?" "I would." He met her eyes. "I have seen what happens when bad timber fails. It is not something you want to gamble on." Saera felt a rush of gratitude so strong it surprised her. "Thank you. But even if you confirmed everything I found, I do not think it would change my father's mind." "He has made his decision." Corwin nodded slowly. "Then I suppose the question is what you are going to do about it." It was a good question, and Saera did not have an answer for it. Not yet. Corwin left an hour later, his string headed south toward the markets. Saera watched him go and then returned to her work, but the conversation stayed with her, circling in the back of her mind like a bird looking for a place to land. The summer deepened, hot and bright, and the mine ran at full capacity. Saera kept her tallies and tried not to think about the cracked props in Tunnel 7. Her father was right about one thing. The tunnels held. No collapses, no cave-ins, nothing to suggest that the old workings were in immediate danger. But every time she went down into the deep seams, she found herself looking up at the ceiling, checking the props. listening for the sound of wood cracking under strain. Corwin made his runs on schedule, arriving every 8 days with his patient mules and his careful records. Saera found herself looking forward to those mornings, to the quiet efficiency of working with someone who understood precision and care. They talked more now, about the mine and the trails, about weather and market prices, and the small details of their work. She learned that Corwin had served in the border militia for 6 years before taking up muleskinning, that he had a sister in the southern plains who raised horses, that he preferred tea to ale, and had a talent for mending harness leather. Small things, the kind of details you learned about someone when you worked alongside them day after day. And she began to notice the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, a soft, focused look that made something warm bloom in her chest. It was midsummer when her father brought up marriage. Saera was in the tally shed, reconciling the month's shipping records when Growldock walked in and closed the door behind him. She looked up in surprise. Her father rarely came to the shed, preferring to summon her to his office when he needed to discuss business. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Saera set down her pen. "About what?" "About your future." Growldock pulled up a stool and sat heavily. "You are 24, Saera." "It is time you thought about marriage." Saera blinked. Of all the things she had expected her father to say, that had not been among them. "I have been too busy thinking about the mine." "The mine will still be here after you are wed," Growldock said. "And a good marriage would be an advantage to the business. An alliance with one of the other mining families, or perhaps a merchant house in the south." "I am not interested in a marriage of alliance," Saera said carefully. "Then what are you interested in?" Her father's tone was sharp. "Because I have not seen you show interest in anyone, and I am starting to wonder if you plan to spend your whole life buried in ledgers." Saera felt her temper rise. "Maybe I prefer ledgers to most of the men I have met." "Then you have not met the right men." Growldock stood, pacing to the window and back. "I have been talking with some of the families. There is a merchant in Southridge, Bell & Son, who would be a good match, and the Ironbrow mine has a cousin of theirs, a capable man who works in their refining operation." "Father." Saera kept her voice level with effort. "I appreciate your concern, but I am not ready for marriage talks." "You may not be ready, but the mine needs to think about succession," Growldock said. "I am not a young man, Saera. When I am gone, this operation will need strong leadership, and you will need a strong partner to help run it." Saera stared at her father, seeing for the first time the lines of worry around his eyes, the gray creeping into the dark hair at his temples. He was thinking about the future, about what would happen to his life's work after he was gone, and he was trying to secure it the only way he knew how, but his way felt like a cage closing around her. "Can we talk about this later?" she asked quietly. "I have work to finish." Growldock looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Later. But soon, Saera. This is not something we can put off forever." After he left, Saera sat in the quiet of the tally shed and tried to sort through her tangled thoughts. She had always known she would marry eventually, had always assumed it would be to someone practical and suitable, someone who understood the mine and the valley. But the idea of marrying for alliance, for succession, for anything other than her own choice, made her feel cold and hollow. She thought about Corwin, about the way he smiled when his mules did well on a difficult trail, about the quiet competence in his hands when he checked a load or adjusted a strap, about the way he had offered to look at the timbering without asking for anything in return. And she thought about the cracked props in Tunnel 7, still unrepaired, still waiting for autumn that felt impossibly far away. The next time Corwin came through, Saera found herself watching him more closely than usual. He was helping his assistant, a young man named Tomas, adjust the pack on one of the mules, his movements patient and sure. When he looked up and caught her staring, he smiled, and Saera felt her cheeks warm. "Everything all right, Miss Wolfstone?" he asked, walking over to where she stood by the scales. "Fine," Saera said then, because she could not seem to help herself. "How long have you been running mules?" Corwin looked surprised by the question. 6 years, maybe 7, since I left the militia. Why? Just curious." Saera made a show of checking her ledger. "Do you ever think about doing something else?" "Sometimes." Corwin leaned against the scale platform, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. "But this work suits me. I like the travel, like being my own master. And the mules are good company, better than most people I have met." "Better than people," Saera glanced at him. "That seems lonely." "It can be," Corwin admitted, "but it is honest. A mule does not lie to you or pretend to be something it is not. If it is tired, it shows you. If it is unhappy, you know, there is something peaceful in that." Saera thought about her father's talk of marriage alliances and merchant sons. "I think I understand what you mean." Corwin gave her a curious look. "You sound like you have been dealing with dishonest people." "Just complicated ones." Saera closed her ledger. "My father has been talking about marriage. He wants me to consider some matches that would be good for the mine's business." She had not meant to say it, the words just slipped out, and she felt immediately foolish. But Corwin's expression shifted, becoming very still. "And do you want to consider them?" he asked quietly. "No." Saera met his eyes. "I do not think I do." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that felt like stepping onto uncertain ground. Corwin's gaze was steady on hers, and Saera saw in his face the same careful awareness she felt, the sense that they were both standing at the edge of something that could not be taken back once acknowledged. "Then I hope you do not," Corwin said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. Before Saera could respond, Tomas called from the mule's string that they were loaded and ready, and the moment broke. Corwin straightened, nodding to her with his usual professional courtesy, and walked back to his team. But as Saera watched him lead the string out of the valley, she felt the warmth in her chest spread and settle, becoming something she could not ignore. The mine ran through high summer and into early autumn, and with each passing week, Saera found her conversations with Corwin growing longer. They talked about everything and nothing, about the small details of their work and the larger questions of what they wanted from life. Saera learned that Corwin had chosen muleskinning not just for the independence, but because he had seen too much violence in his militia years, and wanted work that built things instead of tearing them down. Corwin learned that Saera had grown up in the mine, that her mother had died when she was 12, and that she had taken over the tallies because she was good with numbers, and her father needed someone he could trust. They did not speak directly about the feeling growing between them, but it was there in the way Corwin found reasons to linger at the loading docks. In the way, Saera made sure to be at the scales whenever his string was due to arrive. It was there in the soft looks they exchanged when they thought no one was watching, in the careful way they navigated around each other's space, aware of every accidental touch. The mine workers began to notice. Saera caught whispers and knowing looks from the wagon drivers, saw the shift bosses exchange glances when Corwin was around. But no one said anything directly, and Saera told herself it did not matter what people thought. Her father, absorbed in his own concerns about production and contracts, seemed oblivious. Or perhaps he simply did not believe his daughter would be foolish enough to develop feelings for a human teamster with no money and no prospects beyond his mule string. It was late autumn, with the first frost silvering the valley grass, when everything fell apart. Saera was in the tally shed when she heard the bell. Not the regular work bell that marked shift changes, but the emergency bell, the one that was only rung when something had gone badly wrong in the tunnels. She ran. By the time she reached the mine entrance, a crowd had already gathered. Workers were streaming out of the tunnel mouth, their faces pale with rock dust and fear. Saera grabbed the nearest shift boss, a man named Gareth who had worked for her father for 15 years. "What happened?" she demanded. "Collapse in Tunnel 7, Gareth said, his voice tight. "The main prop gave way and brought down half the ceiling. We have got 5 men trapped on the far side of the fall." Saera felt the blood drain from her face. Tunnel 7. The old workings with the cracked timbering that she had wanted to replace months ago. How bad is the fall? Bad. "Maybe 30 feet of ceiling came down. We cannot get to them from this side. Too much loose rock." Gareth looked past her to where Growldock was pushing through the crowd. "We are going to have to dig from the ventilation shaft on the upper level, try to reach them from above." Growldock reached them, his face set in grim lines. "Get crews on it now. I want every available man digging, and send someone to the Ironbrow mine, see if they can spare equipment and hands." "I will organize the crews," Gareth said and hurried away. Saera turned to her father. "The timbering. I told you it was failing." "Not now, Saera." Growldock's voice was like iron. "We deal with the emergency first. Recriminations can come later." "Later might be too late," Saera said, but her father had already moved away, shouting orders to the assembled workers. Saera stood frozen for a moment, feeling helpless and furious all at once. Then she forced herself to move, to think. The trapped men would need supplies when they were reached, water and food and medical supplies. She ran to the storehouse and began pulling together bundles, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fear. She was loading the bundles onto a cart when she heard hoofbeats and looked up to see Corwin riding into the mine yard, his face tight with concern. "I saw the smoke signal from the valley road," he said, swinging down from his horse. "What happened?" "Collapse in Tunnel 7. 5 men trapped." Saera shoved another bundle onto the cart. "They are trying to dig down from the ventilation shaft." Corwin's jaw went hard. "The bad timbering." "Yes." Saera looked at him, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. "I should have pushed harder. I should have made him listen." "This is not your fault," Corwin said firmly. He came to stand beside her, taking the next bundle from her hands and loading it himself. "What can I do to help?" Saera felt a rush of gratitude. "Can you run supplies? We are going to need a steady line between the dig site and the surface." "Consider it done." Corwin was already moving, calling for Tomas and directing the mule string toward the supply yard. For the next 6 hours, Saera worked in a blur of organized chaos. Crews dug in shifts, hauling rock and debris up from the ventilation shaft while carpenters shored up the working face with fresh timber. Corwin and his mules ran a constant relay, bringing supplies to the dig site and carrying away the spoil. Saera coordinated the flow of materials, her ledger forgotten in favor of shouted directions and quick decisions. It was well past dark when they broke through. Saera was at the shaft head when the shout came up from below, and she felt her knees go weak with relief. All 5 men were alive, bruised and shaken but breathing. It took another 2 hours to get them out, lifting them one by one through the narrow shaft opening. The last man up was a young worker named Peter, barely 20, who had only been with the mine for a month. As they pulled him to the surface, Saera saw the way he was shaking, the white shock on his face, and felt her anger at her father crystallize into something cold and clear. When Peter was safely handed over to the medical crew, Saera turned to find Growldock standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the rescue with an unreadable expression. She walked over to him, ignoring the exhaustion dragging at her limbs. "We need to talk." "Yes," Growldock said. "We do." But not here. Come to the house. Saera followed her father across the mine yard to the owner's house, a solid stone building set back from the main workings. Inside, in the familiar parlor where she had grown up, Graldock poured himself a glass of whiskey and drank it in one swallow. "Say what you need to say," he told her. "The mine needs to be shut down for redemburing," Saera said. "All of the old workings, not just Tunnel 7. We do a full inspection and replace everything that is questionable. No arguments, no delays. It happens now." Graldock set down his glass. "Do you know what that will cost?" "Less than it will cost when someone dies in the next collapse," Saera shot back. "We were lucky tonight, Father. Those men could have been killed. And if we keep pushing our luck, eventually it will run out." "I know that." Graldock's voice was rough. "Do you think I do not know that? I have been working these tunnels since before you were born, Saera. I know what the risks are." "Then why did you not listen when I told you the timber was failing?" "Because I was trying to keep the mine running." Graldock slammed his hand on the table. "Because I have contracts to fulfill and workers to pay, and a valley full of people whose livelihood depends on this operation. I cannot just shut down production every time there is a problem. Even when that problem could kill people." Graldock closed his eyes. For the first time, Saera saw her father not as the strong, unyielding owner of the mine, but as a tired man carrying too much weight. "We will shut down the old workings," he said finally. "Do the inspection, replace the timber. We will keep the new seams running to fulfill the contracts, but the old tunnels stay closed until they are safe." It was not everything Saera wanted, but it was more than she had expected to get. "Thank you." Graldock looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. "You have grown into a fine woman, Saera. Your mother would be proud of who you have become." Saera felt her throat tighten. Her father so rarely spoke of her mother, the loss still too painful even after all these years. "I wish she were here," Saera said quietly. "So do I." Graldock poured another glass of whiskey, this time sipping it slowly. "She would know what to do about you." Saera frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean I have seen the way you look at the teamster," Graldock said, "and the way he looks at you." "I am not blind, Saera, even if I am foolish about other things." Saera felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Father, let me speak." Graldock held up a hand. "I have been thinking about your future, about the mine's future, and I have realized that I have been going about it the wrong way." He set down his glass and looked at her directly. "I want you to be happy, Saera, but I also want to see the mine secure, to know that it will be in good hands when I am gone. I thought the answer was a marriage of alliance, someone from the mining families or the merchant houses. But watching you tonight, the way you organized the rescue, the way you held everything together, I realized something." "What?" Saera asked warily. "That you do not need a partner to run the mine. You are already capable of that on your own." Graldock smiled, a small, sad expression. "What you need is someone who will support you, who will stand beside you and care about your happiness as much as the mine's success. And I think the teamster might be that man." Saera stared at her father, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would approve of Corwin?" "I do not know him well enough to approve or disapprove," Graldock said honestly, "but I would like to. If he is important to you, then he matters to me." He paused, then added, "Invite him to dinner tomorrow night. Let me talk to him properly, not just as an employee, but as a man who might become part of this family." Saera felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, Father." Graldock reached out and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for being strong enough to fight me when I was wrong. That took courage, and the mine will need that courage in the years ahead." Saera left her father's house and walked back toward the mine yard, her mind spinning. The night was cold and clear, stars sharp overhead, and the valley was finally quiet after the chaos of the rescue. She found Corwin at the stable, checking over his mules after the long day's work. He looked up as she approached, and the concern in his face made her chest ache. "How are the trapped men?" "Alive. Shaken, but they will recover." Saera leaned against the stable wall, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "My father is shutting down the old workings for Reddenburing." Corwin's expression cleared. "That is good. That is the right decision." "It took almost killing 5 people to get him to make it," Saera said bitterly. "But he made it." Corwin came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold night air. "That matters." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Saera said, "My father wants to meet you, properly, I mean. He asked me to invite you to dinner tomorrow night." Corwin went very still. "He knows about us?" "Yes." Saera looked at him. "He said he wanted to meet the man who might become part of the family." "Saera." Corwin turned to face her fully, and in the lantern light from the stable his eyes were serious. "I need to be honest with you about something. I am not a man of means. I have my mules and my wagon and enough saved to see me through a bad season, but that is all. I cannot offer you wealth or position or any of the things your father probably wants for you." "I do not want wealth or position," Saera said. "I have spent my whole life surrounded by the mine's riches, and I have seen what they cost. I want something different." "What do you want?" Saera took a breath, feeling the weight of the question. "I want someone who sees me as more than the mine owner's daughter, someone who values honesty over profit and safety over speed, someone who treats his mules with kindness and stands his ground when it matters." She met Corwin's eyes. "I want you if you will have me." Corwin's expression softened into something that made Saera's heart race. "I have wanted you since the morning you rode up to check the switchback trail and did not flinch from the truth," he said quietly. "I have wanted you through every conversation, every shared look, every moment we have worked together, but I did not think I had the right to say it." "You have the right," Saera said. "You have always had the right." Corwin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough with calluses, warm against her skin, and when he leaned down to kiss her, Saera felt the world narrow to just the two of them, just this moment of connection and choice. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Corwin rested his forehead against hers. "I will come to dinner tomorrow," he said, "and I will do my best to convince your father that I am worthy of you, even though I am not sure I am." "You are," Saera said. "Trust me on that." The next evening, Saera dressed with more care than she had in years, choosing a simple green dress that her mother had made for her before she died. When Corwin arrived at the owner's house, he was clean-shaven and wearing what were clearly his best clothes, his hair neatly tied back. He looked nervous, and Saera felt a wave of affection for him. Growldock greeted them at the door and led them into the dining room, where a simple but generous meal had been laid out. For the first part of the evening, the conversation was careful and formal, Growldock asking about Corwin's background and work, Corwin answering with respectful honesty. But as the meal progressed, Saera saw her father's posture gradually relax. Corwin spoke about his time in the militia without bravado, about his decision to leave and start fresh. He talked about the mule business with genuine passion, describing the routes and the animals and the satisfaction of completing a difficult haul safely. And when Growldock asked him directly what his intentions were toward Saera, Corwin met the older orc's eyes without flinching. "I care for your daughter," he said simply. "I respect her mind and her courage, and I believe she deserves a partner who will value those things as much as I do. I cannot offer her great wealth, but I can offer her honesty and loyalty and a life built on our own terms." Growldock was quiet for a long moment, studying Corwin. Then he said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led them out of the house and across the mine yard to the main office. Inside, he unlocked a heavy safe and pulled out a leather bag, which he set on the desk with a solid thunk. "This is gold," Growldock said, opening the bag to show the glint of coins inside. 10 years of profit from the mine, set aside for Saera's future. Traditionally, it would be her dowry, the price paid to secure a good marriage. Saera felt her stomach drop. Her father had talked about alliances and merchant sons, but she had not realized he had been building a dowry for years. Growldock looked at Corwin. "If you marry my daughter, this is yours. Enough gold to buy land, to establish a business, to set yourself up as a man of substance in the valley. All I ask in return is your loyalty to this family and to the mine." Corwin stared at the gold for a long moment, and Saera saw something flicker across his face. Then he looked up at Growldock and shook his head. "I cannot accept that," he said quietly. Growldock frowned. "You do not want to marry her." "I want to marry her more than I have ever wanted anything," Corwin said, "but not like this, not with conditions attached." He took a breath. "If I take that gold, I become a man who owes his position to your generosity. I become someone who might look the other way when you make a decision I do not agree with, because I am afraid of losing what you gave me. And that is not the man Saera deserves. What are you saying?" Growldock's voice was dangerous. "I am saying I will not take your gold." Corwin turned to Saera, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "I am asking for something more valuable. I am asking for Saera's heart, freely given, with no price and no obligations except the ones we choose for ourselves." Saera felt tears spill over and down her cheeks. "You have it," she said, her voice breaking. "You have had it for months." Corwin smiled, that rare, full expression that transformed his whole face, and crossed the room to take her hands in his. "Then that is all I need." Growldock stood frozen, staring at the bag of gold on his desk. For a long moment no one spoke. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. It was a rusty sound, as if he had forgotten how, but it was genuine. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met or the biggest fool," he said to Corwin. "I have not decided which." "Probably both," Corwin admitted. Growldock shook his head, still chuckling. "My daughter said you were honest. She did not mention you were also stubborn as a mountain goat." He looked at Saera. "Is this truly what you want? A life with a muleteer who turns down gold?" "It is exactly what I want," Saera said. Her father studied them both for another moment, then nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing. But understand this, Keller. If you hurt my daughter, there is not a valley in this world deep enough to hide you." "I understand," Corwin said seriously, "and I would expect nothing less." Growldock picked up the bag of gold and locked it back in the safe. "The gold stays here, for emergencies or for your children's future, if you should have them. But the choice of when and how to use it will be Saera's, not mine. This family has put too much weight on gold for too long. Perhaps it is time we valued other things." He walked to the door, then paused and looked back. "The mine will be closing the old workings tomorrow for redimburing. The work will take at least a month, maybe 2. Saera will oversee the inspection and replacement. Keller, if you are willing, I could use a man with your mine experience to help with the new timber work. The pay is good, and it would give you a chance to learn the operation from the inside." Corwin glanced at Saera, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored," he said. "Good. Report to the timber yard tomorrow at dawn." Growldock opened the door. "And in the future, when my daughter tells me the timbering is failing, I will listen the first time. I have learned that lesson well enough." After her father left, Saera and Corwin stood alone in the office, hands still clasped. "That was quite a speech," Saera said, wiping at her tears with her free hand. "About asking for my heart." "I meant every word," Corwin said. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. I have lived my whole adult life trying to be independent, not beholden to anyone. But then I met you, and I realized that some things are worth making promises for." Saera leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart against hers. "What do we do now?" "Now," Corwin pulled back enough to look at her face. "Now we rebuild the mind together, and when that is done, we build a life together. One choice at a time, one day at a time." "I like that plan," Saera said softly. "Good, because I have one more thing to ask you." Corwin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, which he held up for her to see. It was a ring, simple and plain, made of what looked like braided copper wire. "I made this myself, from harness wire and solder. It is not much, but it is honest work, and it is mine to give." "Saera Wolfstone, will you marry me?" Saera looked at the ring, at the careful way the wires had been twisted and sealed, at the worn calluses on Corwin's fingers as he held it out to her. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Corwin slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her again, gentle and sure, and Saera felt the last of her doubts and fears melt away. The remembering of the mind took 6 weeks. Saera and Corwin worked side by side, documenting every tunnel and overseeing the replacement of hundreds of props and beams. It was hard, meticulous work, but Saera found a deep satisfaction in it. For the first time in her life, she was making the mine truly safe, not just profitable. Corwin proved to be as skilled with timber work as he had claimed, and the mine crews quickly came to respect his judgment. He had a gift for spotting weak points and explaining complex structural problems in simple terms, and Saera watched her father's estimation of him grow with each passing day. By the time the work was complete, the old workings had been transformed. Fresh timber gleamed in the lantern light, properly braced and seated. The tunnels that had once made Saera nervous to enter now felt solid and secure. The mine reopened with a small ceremony. Graldok stood at the entrance to Tunnel 7, now fully remembered and inspected, and spoke to the assembled workers. "This mine has been my life's work," he said. "And for too long, I thought that meant pushing for every ounce of profit, every day of production. But I forgot that the true wealth of this operation is not the salt we take from the mountain. It is the people who take it. My daughter reminded me of that, and I am grateful to her." He turned to Saera and Corwin, who stood together at the edge of the crowd. "Today we reopen these tunnels, but we reopen them with a new understanding. Safety first, always. And we do it with my blessing on another new beginning. My daughter will be married next month to a man who had the courage to refuse gold and ask for something more valuable instead." There was a murmur through the crowd, and Saera saw smiles on the faces of the workers. Many of them had been there the night of the collapse, had seen how hard she and Corwin had worked to save the trapped men. They understood what this meant. Graldok raised his hand. "I give you my oath, here and witnessed, that this mine will be run with honor from this day forward. May the mountain be kind to us, and may we be worthy of its gifts." The workers cheered, and the mine bell rang out across the valley, clear and bright. Saera felt Corwin take her hand, his grip warm and steady, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The wedding was held a month later at the small chapel that sat at the pass above the valley. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the mine workers and a handful of traders and teamsters from the southern routes. Saera wore her mother's green dress, altered to fit her, and carried a bouquet of mountain wildflowers that Corwin had picked for her that morning. When the priest asked if anyone objected to the union, there was only silence and smiling faces. Corwin's vows were brief and heartfelt. "I promise to stand beside you, to value your heart above all treasures, and to build a life with you based on honesty and care. This I swear, before these witnesses and before the mountain itself." Saera's vows echoed his. "I promise to trust you to build our future together as partners and to choose love over gold every day of our lives. This I swear, freely and gladly." When the priest pronounced them married, the cheers could be heard all the way down in the valley. The celebration afterward was held at the mine yard, tables set up under the open sky and food brought by everyone who attended. Graldock made a toast to the new couple, his voice rough with emotion. "To my daughter and her husband. May they have the courage to forge their own path, the wisdom to learn from their mistakes, and the love to sustain them through whatever the years may bring." As the sun set over the valley and the stars began to appear, Saera and Corwin slipped away from the celebration and climbed to a quiet overlook where they could see the whole of the mine spread out below them. The lights from the workers' houses twinkled like earthbound stars, and the mountain loomed dark and solid against the sky. "You have any regrets?" Corwin asked, pulling her close against the evening chill. Saera thought about the question, about all the paths she might have taken, all the choices she might have made differently. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "Do you?" "Only that I did not ask for your heart sooner," Corwin said. He kissed the top of her head. "We could have had more time." "We have all the time we need," Saera said. "Starting now." They stood together in the growing dark, watching the valley settle into night, and Saera felt a peace she had never known before. She had her father's blessing, her work at the mine, and a partner who valued her for who she was, not what she represented. It was more than enough. It was everything. In the years that followed, Saera and Corwin built a life that balanced the mine's demands with their own needs and dreams. Corwin continued to run freight, though now he took contracts that kept him closer to the valley, and he trained new teamsters in the careful practices he had learned. Saera remained the mine's tally keeper, but she also became its safety inspector, instituting regular timber checks and maintenance schedules that other mines in the region began to adopt. 2 years after their wedding, Saera gave birth to a daughter they named Aelin, a sturdy green-skinned baby with her mother's sharp eyes and her father's quiet temperament. The child grew up running through the mine yard, learning numbers at Saera's knee and the names of every mule in Corwin's string before she could read. 4 years after Aelin came a son, whom they named Nalan. He had his father's gray eyes and a love of heights that had him climbing the timber stacks before he could properly walk. Graldock proved to be a devoted grandfather, teaching Aelin her letters in the tally shed and showing Nalan how to check timber joints. He lived to see both children grow past toddlerhood, and when he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, he left the mine to Saera with a will that stipulated it be run according to the safety principles she had fought so hard to establish. Saera took over as mine owner with Corwin as her partner in all things. Together they expanded the operation carefully, opening new seams only after thorough geological surveys, and building in safety margins that other owners called excessive. But the Wolfstone mine never had another serious collapse. It earned a reputation as the safest operation in the territory, and workers came from all over seeking employment under Saera's fair and careful management. Years later, when both children were grown and starting families of their own, Saera and Corwin stood once more at the overlook above the valley, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "You remember the first time we stood here?" Corwin asked, his arm around her waist. "Our wedding night," Saera said. "You asked if I had any regrets. And you said no," Corwin smiled. "I have been thinking about that lately, about the choice I made to refuse your father's gold and ask for your heart instead." Saera looked up at him, seeing the silver threading through his dark hair, the laugh lines around his eyes. Having second thoughts? Never. Corwin pulled her closer. I was just thinking that it was the easiest choice I ever made. Because I knew, even then, that your heart was worth more than all the gold in these mountains, and I have spent every day since proving that I was right. Saera felt tears prick at her eyes, the good kind, born of joy rather than sorrow. We built something good, did we not? We built something extraordinary, Corwin said. A life based on trust and partnership and love, a mind that values its people, a family that knows the difference between wealth and riches. Below them, lights were beginning to appear in the valley as the evening shift changed, and workers headed home to their families. The mine that had been Sarah's burden and her father's obsession had become something different under her care. A thriving operation that provided good work and fair wages, that put safety before profit and honored the people who gave it their labor. Saera leaned into her husband's embrace and thought about all the ways their lives had unfolded from that first morning, when Corwin had refused to take wet salt over a dangerous trail. Every choice since then had been built on that foundation of honesty and care, of choosing what was right over what was easy. I love you, she said quietly. I love you too, Corwin replied. More than I did yesterday and less than I will tomorrow. They stood together as the stars emerged, two people who had chosen each other freely and built a life that honored that choice. The mountain rose solid at their backs, the valley spread peaceful below, and in the gathering dark they held each other close, grateful for every moment that had brought them to this place. The story of the orc woman whose father offered gold as dowry, and the man who refused it became legend in the mining valleys, told and retold around evening fires and at harvest celebrations. But for Saera and Corwin, it was never just a story. It was the truth they lived every day, in every choice they made together. And in the end, that truth was worth more than all the gold the mountain could ever yield.